The National Guard is now activated in Charlotte after North Carolina's governor declared a state of emergency following 2 nights of violent riots. Charlotte is bracing for a 3rd night of protests, but hopefully the extra manpower will help keep things under control tonight. It all ignited after the fatal police shooting of a black man that police still maintain was armed with a gun. It was utter chaos in the streets of Charlotte last night. Fox News correspondent Steve Harrigan was in the middle of it all and did some amazing reporting.
We're seeing a real mass of tear gas as well as reports of firing rubber bullets into the crowd. This is a lot more out of control than in Ferguson. This is a pitched battle between police and protesters that's gone back and forth for a long period of time. I'm seeing scenes here that the last time I've seen them were on the West Bank, the back and forth between Israelis and Palestinians with tear gas. That's what we're seeing here in Charlotte, North Carolina.
So Steve is back on the ground. He joins us now. Steve, thank you. So this video, it's all about this video, it feels to me, the video that allegedly will show whether or not Mr. Scott was armed or not, whether holding a gun or not. Now, the lawyers for the family came out and said they had not viewed the video. About an hour ago, they had not yet viewed the video. Has that, the fact that they came out and talked to the people of Charlotte, has that calmed the tone a bit?
I don't think things have calmed down at all. Up and down this street here where we saw that riot last night, we're seeing similar scenes of this. People really preparing for more possible violence. Hotels and merchants pulling out the glass, sometimes replacing what was shattered last night, or else putting in plywood or OSB board to try and protect it from more violence tonight. That's what's going on now. At the height of the violence last night, we saw about 800 people. And I've got to tell you, I think a lot of those people out there last night were not listening to lawyers and don't care whether the man who was killed by a police officer was holding a book or a gun. They are angry. They want revenge. They attacked the police last night. They said they're going to be back again tonight. So we're going to see whether that stronger police presence will slow things down tonight or not, Eric.
We're going to bring it around, but any news on when the family is going to actually see it and when they're going to let the public see it?
Yeah, the lawyers for the family said they were too traumatized to actually speak to the media today. There's been 2 real sources of information throughout this conflict, very different sources. On the one hand, you have the police and public officials giving one version of events. On the other hand, you have a whole range of people, including some protesters, going on social media, giving a very different version of events. So we've seen different things, like a young man was shot last night during the protests. Police saying it was civilian-on-civilian shooting, but the people who were running from that shot saying police fired the shots. So 2 very different narratives, depending on who you listen to, officials and police or social media. A lot more direct reporting, some of it reckless.
All right, Greg.
Yeah, Steve, we were wondering, you're seeing these protests in Charlotte, not so much in Tulsa. Why is that? Is it because it's easier perhaps to get to Charlotte for activists or protesters? I don't know.
It's a good question because you think on the merits of the case and the reason to protest, the situation in Tulsa might lend itself more to the protesters. They might have more weight of truth on their side than in this case, where it looks like the man killed did have a gun, did have an arrest record. You had 3 officers present, and you do have officials saying he posed an imminent threat. Why it's happening here and not there is tough to say. And it's hard to predict what's going to happen. We saw it really ebb and flow last night. There's 10 people out on the street, then there's 800 people out on the street. One thing that did not turn them back, though, last night was tear gas, and that's what we've seen since Ferguson. These protesters, the ones here last night, were organized and determined. Flashbang grenades, mace, rubber bullets did not turn them back. They kept regrouping. They wanted more. They wanted to fight the police, and they were out in force last night, Greg.
All right, KG.
Yeah, I just have a question in terms of the response. I mean, obviously there has to be an adequate measure of public safety concern here for the businesses, the people that are around in that area to be able not to be held hostage in their homes, essentially because of the fear of violence and reprisal on the streets. What is the plan specifically from the police department to try to curb this back so it's not a 3rd night?
Yeah, when you talk about being held hostage, that's literally what happened on Highway 277 around the city. Protesters were out on that highway, and people were terrified in their cars. The chief of police said, lock your doors, help is on the way. So that's really not too encouraging. I think if you had to summarize from an amateur point of view the police response last night, it was completely botched. They didn't have enough officers on the street. Protesters time and time again gained the upper hand. It took 4 hours to clear this 4 blocks where I'm standing right now. They said it's not going to happen again tonight with the National Guard, with the governor, with a state of emergency. We're going to have to wait and see. It got ugly after dark the last 2 nights. It seems normal right now. That could change quickly.
Okay, Dana.
Steve, I wanted to follow up on that. I'm just curious what you're hearing about the cooperation between city officials and the state, so between the mayor and the governor. We know that that was certainly a concern in other locations where there have been protests before, and there's that struggle sometimes between those two because a mayor doesn't want the governor to step in, but the governor feels like he or she has a responsibility to do so.
I think the final result that there was a failure is clear. The governor has said he's offered additional assets. It seemed like the mayor was reluctant initially to take those assets, threw the blame on her security advisors initially, but just from an amateur point of view, it seems like you'd err on the side of caution. You'd err on the side of having too many forces and then try and ramp down. That's not what happened. And by allowing the demonstrators to take control of the street for 4 hours, it gave them confidence and time to regroup, increase their numbers. So it put the police who were out here all night in a very tough position. There weren't a lot of them. They couldn't make arrests. They were getting beer bottles thrown at their heads, 3 of them hospitalized. So a tough position for the police on the street last night. Not enough numbers. It was clear, and that's been admitted by the chief.
Yeah, and the governor, by the way, said he's going to put 700 more law enforcement through the National Guard on the street tonight. Juan has a question.
So, Steve, one of the intriguing aspects of this case to me is what happened on Facebook, where you have a woman who claims to be Keith Scott's daughter. I don't know if she is his daughter, but she's on Facebook saying, you know what, they killed my daddy. My daddy's dead. And she's shouting and using profanity, and she says also, let me tell you that he was holding a book. Now, the police chief says, no book, a gun. That's a very distinct narrative, but the idea that he was holding a book reminds me of Hands Up, or it reminds me of people, you know, I Can't Breathe. And I think it might have contributed to local protests. I don't think there's time enough for anybody from out of state to get there.
You're right. The fact that people are able and aggressively posting on Facebook without any verification, and it gets 1 million hits, it's almost too late after the fact. That initial impression is so strong. If it gets 1 million people to watch it, her narrative is out there, whether it's true or not. And that's been really one of the biggest differences since Ferguson, is protesters, community activists taking control over social media, speaking directly to people without any real editorial guidance, any censorship, or sometimes any respect for the facts of the case.
All right, Steve, we're gonna come back to you a little bit later in the show. Thank you very much. We're going to talk about this a little bit, continue for a few more minutes. But then let me ask you, there's this whole debate over when to bring in additional manpower. If you do it too soon or too aggressively, it makes people agitated, makes protesters more agitated. If you wait too long, businesses can get destroyed, people can get hurt.
And I just spontaneously was thinking about that when I came up with the question. I'm trying to remember which protest it was where recently there was a similar situation where they should have called in more at the time, and they were unprepared, and even though they had warning that there was going to be protesters. So it is just an interesting dynamic between local officials and state officials, and even sometimes federal officials. You know, should there be additional resources required? And I know that mayors like to say that they can handle it on their own, but I don't think there's any shame in asking the state for cooperation and additional assistance. I don't think that is a mar on anybody's record.
Well, the mayor this morning, Jennifer Roberts, was on. She had a press conference with the police chief and the community relations director, and she said she had consulted with her city officials about what their needs were and what they expected, and come to the conclusion they didn't need the additional forces.
Right.
But I do think that we are missing the point if we're focused on how many forces or the like. I mean, this is something that is sweeping the country. This is the #1 political issue right now in black America for sure.
Right.
And I think it's coming to the forefront of our national politics. And it's causing alarm because I think people realize there's something much bigger here that's been ignored by people who want accountability for the way that poor people, mostly blacks and Latinos, but poor people of all stripes are treated by police use of excessive force.
But Juan, are you talking about the protests or are you talking about the rioting?
I'm talking about legitimate grievance, Greg.
Okay, but what we are looking at is not legitimate grievance. How is a shooting by a black police officer of a black man a race riot? Because they're changing the story. The media is allowing the story to change. This is not about grievance. This is about opportunity to riot. That's all it is.
I don't think so. I think that you have people now nationally, and I think this is, in other words, I think they're picking up on what happened in Tulsa. You mentioned Tulsa.
Right.
I think they're picking up on that in a big way, and I think you see it Ferguson, Baltimore, Chicago. I mean, you go on and on. At some point, you got to say, hey, there's something big going on here, and we're missing it.
I don't think you're wrong, but you also have to understand there has to be respect for the rule of law. They're not making it better by committing more crimes or acts of violence. What about the police officers? What about the police officer, the African-American officer that devoted his life, and it's a family of law enforcement tradition of serving, that was in this horrible situation, that saw a gun that was recovered at the scene? Does he have a right to live?
Sure.
Does he have a right to defend himself?
Of course.
As well?
But I think the question is one of accountability, obviously. Kimberly. Are police officers actually held accountable, or is it the case that people like us, America's middle class, we say, you know what, thank God for the thin blue line. Keep those people over there. And if the officer is at fault, you know what, we're always going to give the officer the benefit of the doubt because we think police are pretty much good people.
I don't give the police the benefit of the doubt. I was on the officer-involved shooting team for the San Francisco DA's office, and prosecuted officers
is charged already. I mean, I
that's
agree
in Tulsa. That's in Tulsa,
right? In Tulsa. But a couple of quick numbers for you. Last year, 2015, there were 990 people killed by police. 494 were white, 258 were black. Yeah. This year so far, 324 white, 173 black.
Right, so
double the number of white people are killed by police.
This is total distortion. Come on.
Well,
24%. I think the number.
Numbers.
No, I'm telling you something. 24% of the people being fatally shot by cops are black.
Yeah.
And if you compare the numbers in terms of black men, I've told you this before. 6% of Americans are black men, but about 40% of the people shot. So
the black population is about 13 or 14%.
Yeah, versus the 24%.
And the 24 number is higher than the black population.
That's what I'm saying.
But the crimes being committed by that population, it mirrors the number of crimes being committed by the white population. Numerically, it's people are being killed. White people are being killed at a higher rate numerically, just straight statistics, than black people. If you consider the number of crimes committed by blacks versus whites, they are.
But the other thing, you know, there was a black female that was shot 8 times over the weekend in Philadelphia. We didn't mention her about race because she was a cop. Nobody even, nobody talked about the Philly ambush. There were no protests about a black female officer being shot 8 times. There were no riots. There was no activism. There was no Sharpton.
So this is more.
Yeah, where was Black Lives Matter for that?
This is more cop, not race. Yeah.